No, we're ready.
Okay, so we are on Samach Ches Amud Beis near the bottom, and after a detailed discussion about wages, because wages are the effect of wages minimizes ribis, because once you have a wage, then anything that you do over and above the loan or the deal can be attributed to a wage and not to ribis. So generally speaking, that's the approach, is to find a way to pay a wage. Now, we brought down Rabbi Yehuda earlier, last week, and also several others when it came to the question of what's a wage. And Rabbi Yehuda said it's totally de minimis. I mean, you literally a dried fig, which is, maybe it's a shavapruta if it is, that's enough of a wage to take away the question of ribis. His son Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda also went along with that, and he said that when that with a shepherd is out on the field, then even a puff of wool. In other words, if the wind blows a little bit of a puff and the wool gets removed, that's already a schar. Obviously, that's almost a nothing. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that that when it comes to a shepherd who or someone who tends the flock, and an animal has a baby, has a child, then you don't even have to do anything, because whatever the mother does for you, in other words, if it works, that's a schar, even though you have extra work now because of a young calf or whatever it is. So it's consistent. So let's look at the words, because it's going to be very important in our discussion today.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
You said Samach Tes on
Ches,
the base?
ches, samach ches amud beis.
Tes. Oh,
Yeah, it did sound like Samach test before.
Oh,
I'm
because
sorry.
sorry. Yeah, samach
my
ches amud beis. Samach ches amud
marker
beis.
was in Samid Ches.
Yeah.
Samach ches amud beis near the
Yeah,
bottom. So,
yeah.
mark the words. Rav Nachman says the halacha is Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, and the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. It's important to note those words, because we're going to discuss that. What does that actually mean when he says the halacha is, and then repeats the halacha each time, according to the Manda Omer? Every situation is a little bit different, but they all follow a certain pattern. Okay, so that's where we are now. So we're going to continue talking about Iska. Um, And the Gemara wants to find a way to have an iska without schar. In other words, we're talking about wage, schar, even nominal. Nominal is considered enough. So now the Gemara wants to take a turn, and it gives us an example of a situation where the partner who's doing the work does not get a wage, and there's still not ribis. So let's see how the Gemara presents that. B'nei Rav Ilish, Nafa Kalai Hahushdara. So Rav Ilish was a gadol, and he had children. And so Rav Ilish was a businessman, and he wrote an iska. Uh, and so after he was nifter, the iska came to light, and there was a discussion about the iska, iska with regard to the children. So Rav Ilish wasn't here to discuss it. We had to now assume certain facts. So what are we assuming? The Hava Kosev Bay, what was in the Iska? Palga Ba'agar, Palga Behefsid. That Rav Ilish had a partner, and Rav Ilish was the manager of the Iska, and the partner was the one who put in the funds. And he said very straightforward, half Palga Be'agar, Palga Behefsid. We're going to split it 50-50, up or down. That's all it
Excuse
said.
me. Excuse me, Rabbi. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to be a pest, but where are we on Samach Tes Ahmed Aleph or Ahmed Beis?
No. Samach Omud Samach Ches.
Yes, yeah, right.
About 5 lines from the bottom.
There's a two dots, Amar of Nachman, and it's about 2 lines after that.
2 lines after that,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
Mahuda,
thanks.
yeah. B'nai Rav Ilish. It starts with B'nai Rav Ilish. It's about
Okay.
5 lines from the bottom. So, um, in other words, Rav Ilish is no longer here. He can't explain to us what the Iska is. So they found the Iska, and now they come to the children, to the heirs, and say, okay, what's going on here? There is an Iska that says Palga Palga Ba'ager, Palga Behefsid. Nothing more, nothing about a wage, just half and half profit, half loss. And there's nothing about a wage. So l'chayra, we're saying here there has to be some indication of a wage to take it out of the question of ribis. Rav Elish was a gadol. If he wrote it that way, that he wrote it b'kavana, he wrote it with intent. He knew what he was doing. So they challenged the Iska and said, how do we interpret this Iska? If it was from a regular Jew, we can say, okay, he made a mistake. But Rav Ilish didn't make a mistake. He wrote it that way, and he was the sort of the manager, the managing partner. So how do we understand this? So here's how this unfolds. So they went to Rava, and they said, asked them a shaila, what should we do here? The Bnei Ilish said, what should we do here? We have this iska, and there's no fee, and there's potential ribis. Omar Rava. So what did Rav say? Rav Ilish gavra rabbahu. Rav Ilish was clearly a gadol. I mean, so he right away said, we're not going to be choshid Rav Ilish. Vitur le'inche lo havasafi. And he would never have done something in a deal that he was involved with, which would bring out ribis. Okay, we're making that assumption that he understood business because he was a businessman. And the fact that he didn't put wages into the deal says something. So let's examine that because you can't take it at face value. Oh, there's ribis because there's no wage. So that's how Rava approached it. So Rava says, okay, let's understand whatever it says on the face of the document. Let's go into it a little bit more deeply and let's understand. So here's the svara. It's very interesting. Monavshach. All right, monavshach means either or. You have a choice. Now, this is the interpretation of the Iska that Rav Ilish got into, where he only mentioned schar and agra and hefsid. Palga ba'agar. If you want to understand that Rav Ilish partnered with the other fellow in the profits, that means in the gain, each one would get half the gain. So if each one have half the gain, trei tilsa behefsid, then the person with the money agrees, listen to this, he agrees that if it doesn't make a profit, but it loses money, that he will undertake 2/3 of the loss and leave Rav Ilish with only 1/3 of the loss. So right away you see, it's not as straightforward as 50-50. If we make money, we agree, then we're 50-50. But if we don't make money, this is now Rava interpreting what Rav Ilish meant.
Yeah.
So then it would be a 2/3, 1/3, and then right away you have a schar. Because if Rav Ilish is only bearing 1/3 of the loss, his wage is the difference between 1/3 and 1/2.
Yeah.
Right? So it's pretty straightforward. But that's one way of looking at it.
But there's
Another way of looking at it.
But there's no words that support that. It's just
No. But Rava is intuiting in Rav Ilish that Rav Ilish never would have made a straightforward 50-50 deal without a wage.
So he picked 1/3. He could have picked 1/4 or anything.
Right. So he's imputing that this is what Rav Ilish meant. But ipalga behefsid, if they agree to split the downside, the loss, 50-50, then trei talsa ba'agar, then Rav Ilish would get 2/3 of the profit, and the other fellow, the one with the money, would get 1/3.
So it has to be consistent, in other words.
Right. So it's the up or down, but either way, there is a margin which would allow for a wage. So it wasn't as if he just said 50-50 and that's it. What he meant by 50-50 is you can choose 50-50 one way or the other, but in the whatever you pick on the other side, it isn't 50-50. So again, I mean that's a leap of faith that Rava is taking, and he's saying that's clearly what Rav Ilish would have meant to because he never would have just said straight 50-50. So if that's the case, then the Gemara is bringing down a valid case where there's no actual wage because he didn't get a wage. If there's a profit, they shared 50-50 and he never got a wage, right? If you take the position that 50-50 is on the up and two-thirds, one-third on the down,
There's no ribbis there.
there's no ribbis because the theoretical wage is the fact that he's taking less of a financial loss than the other fellow. And of course, that less of a financial loss is because he's doing the work, which means that's the schar. So the Gemara here tries to give us an example of a case where there isn't an outright wage. And what's telling us is wage doesn't have to mean literally money. It doesn't have to mean, it can mean something other than money. In this case, it's a buffer against a loss. Right. So that's an interesting interpretation that Rava gives us. And fine, now we see an example. But it's not so pashut. Amar Rav Kana. So Rav Kana says, wait a minute. You want to interpret that the way the deal is structured, there's always going to be some quote unquote wage either up or down because of the situation. Mata lishmata kame de Rav Zvid min Adoi. So Rav Kana says, I took your words, Rava, and I went to Rav Zvid. It was the Gadol in Ardor, which is a big yeshiva, and we discussed this. V'amali, and he said to me, Dilma Rav Ilish Tayvil Imo Betzir Hava. No, I'm going to make a different assumption. I'm going to say, remember what we said last week that one way of getting a wage is either a dried fig or taking some fish and dipping it into a sauce. I mean, those are different examples. So Rav Zvid says, no, that I don't accept that. Rav Ilish probably dipped his food into the sauce, and that, according to Rav Yehuda, is sufficient. V'amar Rav Nachman halacha Rav Yehuda. And we just said Rav Nachman said the halacha is Rav Yehuda that you can have a schar even if it's virtually very little, like dipping or a fig, whatever. So Rav Zvid doesn't accept Rava's interpretation that that Rav Ilish made this kind of a deal. I mean, there's nothing to suggest it. Rava is interpreting that that's what Rav Ilish meant, because otherwise, how would it, he would never do it otherwise. It's mamish ribis. So Rav Kana refutes it. And he said, I don't accept that, and I think he did what Rabbi Yehuda, what Rabbi Nachman said. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So that's so he objects to Rava's interpretation. Amalei. So Rav Kana, who took this case to Rav Zvid, says to Rav Zvid, Lav hilchasa itmar. Now here it's very important to understand. I started out by repeating what Rav Nachman said. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, and the halacha is like Shimon Gamliel. So look how the Gemara is going to interpret this. Amalei. So Rav Kana said to him, Lav hilchasa itmar. No, Rav Nachman did not mean to say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Ella shita itmar. Only that the shita, meaning the position, the view of Rabbi Yehuda is shared by his son and by Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. But he did not mean to say the actual halacha is like him. Why? Because there is the words themselves indicated. What are the words? Hochi nami mistabra. It's likely that the halacha is not like him. Why? The ilo tema hochi. Because if you say that the halacha is, that Rav Nachman meant to say it is like him, halacha. why does he have to say by each of the Tanoim, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, halacha is like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Why does he have to say that? If he just says the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and we see that the others follow the same pattern, then we know the halacha is like them. So he wants to be medakdek. He wants to learn out from the verbiage of what Rav Nachman said, that Rav Nachman was concluding the exact opposite. When he said halacha, 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 he was not saying that the halacha is like them. He's saying the halacha is not like them, but they are of one mind. They what's the one mind? That you can be very makel. Rabbi Yehuda's makel, Rabbi Yehuda's makel, and Shimon Gamliel's makel, because he says that you don't have to get any schar for treating the newborn animal. So the consistency is in the shita, not in the halacha. That this is an amazing thing because
Is that common throughout Shas?
no, it's not. He's trying to extrapolate that what he meant halacha, he didn't mean halacha. This is very rare because first of all, the Gemara doesn't often say halacha. The Gemara does not conclude by saying halacha. So that's one thing. But where it is said, he's saying it's the exact opposite. And he said the svara is like that because if he meant the halacha was like that, lema halacha Rabbi Yehuda. He just should have said the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, the mekel mikula, because he's mekel, and everybody who's mekel is like him. So it wouldn't have said the word halacha in front of every one of the tanoim that Rav Nachman mentions. So it's counterintuitive that when he said halacha is like him, halacha is like him, halacha is like him, that he meant not that the halacha is like him, but they're of one mind, that they're of one mind, that they look for the kula, for the leniency. Wherever there's a leniency, in other words, the whole idea is that ribbis has such a profound impact on our lives that if we can hang our hat on anything that suggests it's not ribbis, to cloud the question of ribbis, we do so that we can say it's not ribbis, because the whole point is to not to have ribbis. So, in other words, Rabbi Yehuda, according to this interpretation anyway, is that Rabbi Yehuda and all those who followed him wanted to make it as easy as possible to engage in commerce without having to worry about ribbis. So all they said, okay, it's give them next to nothing. If you give them next to nothing, it's okay. Right? Otherwise, you would say, wait a minute, you didn't give him anything choshev. A wage is choshev. Because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that he disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, no, you have to give a full wage. It has to be seen that he's being paid as a wage in order for it not to be ribbis. So you see clearly he's much more makbid that in order to interpret ribbis, he's saying that you got to be paid. If you're not paid, it's ribbis. So therefore, Rav Kana slugs up Rav Zvid, and we have to go back to Rava's interpretation that what Rav Ilish meant was that there would be an agreement that either the profits or the losses would be
less than 50-50.
Yeah, exactly. That either the profit would be 50-50 and the loss not, or vice versa. So that's where he comes about. Now, what's very interesting is because of the Mefarshim, remember one thing. We're not talking about Ribbis D'Oraisa, right? Ribbis D'Oraisa is not in the picture here. We're talking about what we call Avak Ribbis, Ribbis D'Rabbanan, because of what seems to be coming out of this deal. So the real question is, okay, if it's not the Ribbis D'Oraisa, which is the real Isser, look, if the Rabbanan made it Ribbis, that's no small matter. But when you're dealing with Avak Ribbis, then you can, in a sense, you can start draying. You can say, this is this is that. So what did Rav Ilish really mean here? Or what was the concern with Rav Ilish, I should say, that when Rav Ilish said Agra, that Agra and Hefset are 50-50, what did he mean? So what's interesting here is that a number of the Meforshim, I think the Ravid and others, say this isn't about money. This is not about money. This is about the Isser of Lifnei Iver. What is Lifnei Iver? That you shouldn't engage in something that could potentially not blow back on you, but blow back on somebody else, and that somebody else would be
I agree with, yeah.
why is that?
Hmm.
Because Mida Oraisa, technically Mida Oraisa, a love should not be chayiv if there's ribbis. The malva is the one who should be chayiv in ribbis, not the love, because the love is just doing his thing. He's borrowing money. He's not going to gain anything by this. It's the malva who has the potential for gain. So, I'm sorry. So when you talk about who's gaining and who's not gaining, then sorry, I lost you here. Hold on. Uh, so can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah,
sure.
I'll get the picture back. But so in other words, when we're talking about ribis, we're talking about ribis to the malve, that he's the one who's really going to benefit or not benefit, not the love. So technically, the love isn't chayiv in ribis. What is he chayiv in? He's chayiv in lifnei iver, because if he were to say, "I'm not doing this," then the malve would never be chayiv in ribis,
So
right?
how did they jump from the this Lover and Malver from the original Isker, which is a partnership?
Okay, so what we're trying to
I
say
mean,
is Rav Ilish, he was
yeah, he was concerned.
he
I
was
mean,
concerned, but we're trying to understand what he was concerned about.
well,
So Rava wants to say that his concern was not necessarily a monetary concern. It was a concern in Lifnei Iver that because he was the conduit to make the other fellow get ribbis, because when it says ribbis, yeah, the Torah says an alone, ribbis goes both ways. But midrabanan, why should the loveh have a ribbis issue? It should be
why did
the
yeah?
sorry.
Why did they get off the partnership case? Now they
No,
went back to a loan
right.
for
No, he wants
Malver and the Lover.
no. So no. So Rava wants to interpret Rav Ilish in the best light. So he wants to say that Rav Ilish never meant to say anything that there would be a ribis case because how could he? I mean, he would never allow for ribis. So the Gemara is saying it's as if, not that it is. It's as what he was concerned about was the appearance of ribis on the Malva side, even though he technically Rav Ilish would not be getting ribis because there's no way that he would get ribis. It would be the other side who would get ribis. So Rav is just drawing a parallel. It isn't the same. I'm just saying that
Right.
the
He didn't
underneath
change the case.
principle, yeah, the
He
underneath
wasn't changing the case.
right. No change in the case. The underneath principle is that lifnei iver
Right.
is something that a person should worry about, even if he's not going to be directly in the line of fire. Give me just 1 minute.
Where's Michael? I need some help here.
Apparently, it's not. Well, I heard yesterday he was not in shul yesterday. He wasn't feeling well.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. David, how are you feeling today? David Hornestay.
I've been better and I've been worse. I have to say that all the time.
That was the same answer last week. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
We all have our ups and downs.
Oh, yeah. Is Eretz Yisrael quiet today? The politics are quiet, or the tension about Iran, is it somewhat subsided?
That's for you, Stewie.
I don't know. He's muted.
Nothing much happening here, actually. It's pretty quiet.
Yeah. Well, it's the editorials that rev up the people.
That's true. No, it's been pretty quiet.
but they're on the highest alert they ever had, apparently, if from what I read. But I mean, the military and the intelligence, but daily life goes on.
Absolutely.
Very, very resilient people living under the threats and just ignoring it.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation right there. Ignoring it is basically it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, my grandson goes into the army soon.
Right.
Yeah.
Rob back.
Okay, the interesting point about all of this is that whether it's Rava or even Rav Kana and Rav Zavid, they're all trying to interpret and protect Rav Ilish that he wasn't doing anything improper. So Rava gives one svara, and Rav Zvid gives another svara that it's just that he basically got a dried fig or a piece of fish to dip. And at the end of the day, we're left with and that was, of course, he said that that's not the case because the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. But still, the point is that we're protecting Rav Ilish, that when he said on the face of it there is a 50-50 split, that he never could have meant that because that would be ribbis. So again, it's the Gemara is giving us sort of different thinking. That you don't have to have an outright wage in order to have not to be ribbis. It doesn't have to be paid. It could be paid in the form of a discount. Let's call it a discount in the profit or a discount in the loss, and that's sufficient to take it out of the realm of ribbis. That's what I think the takeaway is. But we also see that when the Gemara says, Rav Nachman says the halacha, it's not the halacha. That's an interesting twist, as you say, Jay. We don't see that. First of all, we don't see that. Usually the Gemara doesn't give us halacha, but when it gives halacha, he didn't mean halacha. He just meant that the opinion of the three are consistent, and that's why he enumerated them, because each one followed that opinion. Because if it would have been halacha, then you just would say the halacha is like a Yehuda. We know that anybody who follows that shita, whether it's his son or Rosh Gamliel, then that's what the halacha is.
So it's another form of derech eretz.
In a sense, yeah. In a sense, yes. That doesn't go out and say that, but that Rabbi Yehuda was the gadol. He was the lead Tana, and everybody else who fell in line with him. So he wants to say the fact. Sometimes kol hamosif goreya, by adding the extra word mosif, by adding the extra word halacha, you're taking it away by saying no, it's not the halacha. The fact that he uses the word halacha, which is a little bit odd, right? Because we say halacha, we think of halacha, but here he's saying that the halacha doesn't mean halacha; it means shita. It means he follows the same course rather than the halacha is like him. Okay.
Well, the whole section here is really analyzing thinking anyway.
Right.
Thinking, what's the motivation?
What's the motivation and how exactly?
What's the way somebody would come to a different answer?
Right. And what you see is not necessarily what is, because in the case of Rav Ilish, he said 50-50, and 50-50 clearly is a problem. So it's not what's in the face, it's what we understand, to interpret. So that's how, and basically Rava interpreted Rav Ilish by saying that's what he meant. Now, having said that, uh, uh, we're going to look at another scenario. Again, we're looking at scenarios here that all encompass the question of schar in a deal and whether or not it takes it out of the iska. Because the subject of iska obviously is something that remains with us. So we have to understand all the nuances of how you can approach a deal and not violate the isser of ribbis. Omar Rav, right? Rav says, Moshe shlish b'scharcha. Here's a different twist. You and I will make a deal, and we're going to agree on what the profit sharing should be. But Moise Shlish B'scharcha, if we make a profit, then anything over a third of the, in other words, if the profit is more than one third of our deal, then anything above one third is your schar, right? So let's say you invest $100, right? Okay, it's around $99, and one third is $33. If you make $33, fine, very good. If you make $35, then your investment is 33 and your schar is 2. So in other words, he wants to introduce, just like we said before, that Rav Ilish didn't mean 50-50. He meant that there was something behind the 50-50. Rob says openly that if the two parties agreed that Moshe Shlish B'scharcha, if there's more than a third profit in your deal, then that's considered your schar, and there's no ribbis. And he says harizeh mutter, and that's okay. So you can construct a deal where the profit level is a certain amount, and anything over the profit level is considered schar. That's how Rav interprets it. Right? Shmuel Omer, so let's go through this, we'll understand. Shmuel Omer, Rav and Shmuel says, Lo motzar Moshe Shlish. Then, let's say it doesn't make let's say the profit is, okay, there's no profit, okay? Or let's say,
But it's equivalent to the third that he would agree to begin with. I mean,
yeah,
there was some profit agreement from the beginning, or do you derive that from the ratio of the partnership?
okay. So the deal has to be set out at the beginning. Is that what you mean? The deal has to be set
Yeah.
out, the meaning this is how we're going to make the deal. We're going to make the deal that we'll each put in money, and when there's a profit, and you do the work, and when there's a profit, then the profit is a shlish. It'll only be a third, and anything above a third is your wage. It could be the wage will be more than the profit, but at least it will take it out of ribbis because there will have been a wage. So that's how Rav interprets it. Says Shmuel, lo matzah ma'aser shlish. Let's say that it's not such a good deal, and they don't make more than a shlish. I mean, it's not a good deal. I mean, they make some money, but they don't make a shlish. Then he won't get schar. So if he doesn't get schar, then we're back to square one.
Why isn't it ribbis?
It looks like ribbis. So if it's contingent on there being at least a one-third profit, says Shmuel, we have a problem. Why? Because Yelech Lebesa Rekon. The partner will go away from the deal to his house without making any money. He'll make profit on the investment, but not on the that's his work into the investment will be ribbis if he doesn't get something more than just the profit he agreed to. So Shmuel says that Rav's position has a hole in it because you're now dependent on there being a floor of what they're going to make, and then on top of that floor, there's considered a wage. And that's dangerous because there's no guarantee that they'll make more than a shlish. Hello, Shmuel.
But if they don't make more than a third,
Then he's worked for free.
he's worked for free, but that's not ribbis.
Yeah. The work that it goes into making the deal profitable is ribbis. Because if remember, if each one invests, then we say half of it is an investment, half of it is a loan, and he has to repay the loan when
With the work.
with the work. But the work is ribbis on the loan because I'm lending you money. You're supposed to pay me back without any strings attached. But you're doing work in our partnership in order to make that money. That work that you're doing in the partnership is considered ribis unless we can offset it some way. So if you could offset it with a wage, then you say it's not ribis. He's getting paid for the work. There's no connection between his work and the loan. But if he doesn't get paid, and the deal is only that he will make a wage if you reach a certain level of profit, then you're in trouble because if you don't reach that level, he never makes a wage. And if he doesn't make a wage, it's ribis. So Shmuel says, I have a problem with Rob's theory because according to him, you're still at the mercy of having ribis if the wage doesn't increase, if the profit doesn't increase by more than a third. So what does Shmuel say? Ella Omer Shmuel, kotzis lo dinner. So Shmuel says the only way to make this work is if he says the financier says to the worker, "I'll give you a dinner." In other words,
No
basically,
matter what.
no matter what. I mean, it's like Rabbi Yehuda's dried fig. But he said, so in other words, Shmuel has to introduce that by saying that since we run the risk of not having a wage because the profit doesn't reach a certain level, therefore the inducement is that at the end of the day you'll get a dinar. Now, mind you, a dinar is not an appropriate wage for this type of work, but it's like Rav Yehuda. It's like a de minimis amount. I mean, a dinar is a dinar, but it's not a full salary. So, but that's sufficient, says Shmuel. So he holds, in a sense, he's agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda that you just have to get instead of Rabbi Shimon Yochai, that you don't have to have a full salary, but even a partial salary is enough because it takes it out of the appearance of working for free, which is ribis. All right.
So that has to be stipulated in the agreement.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. This all has to be arranged in advance so that the parties know exactly how this thing will unfold.
So is that a case of partnership isker? Would that be defined as an
Yeah. No. An ISKA by definition, Jay, is a partnership. It's a partnership of money and service. That by definition, an ISKA means a partnership. That
Right.
two people enter into an ISKA because they're going to make a deal. One will provide the money.
Yeah.
And one will provide the work. Now,
But
all
the
of these
dinar that he just came up with
yeah,
has to be written down as
it
part
has
of
to
the
be written
partnership
down.
document.
Right. That he'll get a dinar no matter what. Whether there's a profit more than a third or not, he's still going to get the dinar. The dinar won't go away if he makes the profit. He'll still get that dinar so that there's no question that the dinar is the schar, and anything that he gets, over one third is his anyway. But if it doesn't reach a third, then there's no ribis because he got a dinar. So again, this is a different view of the same discussion is how you get around this question of ribis. Okay, so now Frank the Gemara, Vesava, Rav, and coaches Lodina. So now the kasha is on Rav. It's a good question. If he doesn't make a third, then it's outright ribis. So doesn't Rav himself understand that in order for there to be no chashash of ribis, that he has to pay him the dinner? It's almost like Shmuel gives a different view, and then you wonder what Rav meant. If Rav says that we make a deal and it's a third, and over a third you get some money, schar. So what is Rav thinking if it's less than a third? The Gemara doesn't tell us what Rav is thinking if they only made a quarter, right? So Shmuel gives an answer. So the Frank the Gemara doesn't Rav say the same thing? A proof is well, Omar Rav. Rav says in another circumstance, Reish Egla the Fatume, that in a case where there is a partnership between someone who puts up the money and let's say a shepherd, this is expression Reish Egla Lefatuma, then the head Reish Egla, the head of the calf, goes to the one who increased the egla, meaning it made it more fatter, better, so that you can get more money. So what do you see? The That Rav says that there is a schar. In this particular case, there's a schar right off the top. In other words, he says to him, "You go ahead and tend to the flock. I'll provide you the flock, which is the equivalent of the money, and you'll get the benefit of it because you'll get the head of the calf. The head of the calf is actually the schar." So we see that Rav does say that besides the profit, there is a wage. Here in our Gemara, we say there's no wage because it's only if you make more than a third. If you don't make a third, then there's nothing. Rav himself says in another circumstance where there is this same kind of split between the finance of the person supplying the money and the worker, that right at the beginning they stipulate that if you improve it, i.e., you make a profit, then on top of the profit, you also make the head of the calf. The head of the calf is worth money. So we see that Rav does hold like Shmuel. Why are you telling me that Rav has a different view than Shmuel? We see that Rav in this other situation says that you do get the head of the calf. So that's in other words.
So this is because the shepherd, the one who the poorer person of the partnership, took care of the flock, and then when it comes time for shechita, or if it's a lamb and the wool, you can also say the wool could also be part of the schar. If you have sheep,
Right.
and normally at some point you take off all the wool at the sheep.
Right.
So he would have to say that some of the wool becomes yours.
Your schar.
Right.
Right. But he didn't say that in the original case. He didn't say. He said anything above a third is your schar. So the question became, what happens if he doesn't make a third?
Right.
So Shmuel came along and he said, no, we're going to make a deal. You're going to get a dinar. And no matter what happens, whether it's more than a third or not, at least you'll be paid something.
Right.
So the Gemara asks Akasha, but doesn't Rav subscribe to that same thing? Because according to Rav, Rav says in this other brisa that when a shepherd makes a deal with the person supplying the flock, he makes a deal right at the outset that he will get the head of the calf, and the head of the calf is schar. That's considered wage. So you see that Rav does say that even though we make a deal, let's say of shlish or whatever, there is a schar right at the outset. So why is he saying here that there is not a schar? The schar is only if you make a third. According to that brisa that we're quoting Rav, he's getting that head of the calf regardless of whether or not he makes a profit in the actual herd. So my lav da amalei mut ma'aser shlish b'scharcha. So he, in other words, the shepherd is going to make that head of the calf no matter what happens. So that's a siman that Rav says you do have to have a wage. In our situation, he says the only wage is if you make it more than a third, but that's not what the other brisa says. The other brisa says you get a wage, and Rav himself says you get a wage because you get the head of the calf. So it's a stira in Rav. What does Rav actually mean? Shmuel says you get a dinar, but Rav says no, there's no extra pay. The pay is only if you make more than a third. This brisa shows us that Rav himself agreed that there is a wage in the form of the rosh of the egla and again, this is at the outset of the deal. This doesn't happen later. The outset of the deal, they make a deal that
so they have to specify the wage.
Right.
And they're writing
and
the
they say that
star of the partnership.
Right. And they say that the wage, you'll get the rosh egla. Now, if let's say the calf does not get fat, let's say, it's a lean calf, then at the so he's not going to make as much because the head of the calf won't be as sumptuous as 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 big as it would be if he were fattening the calf. But he's still getting the head of the calf for whatever it's worth. It could be worth a small amount, could be worth a large amount. But the point is that Rav himself says that a wage, it's incumbent to include a wage on top of the profit. Yet here in the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say, he says you only get a wage if it's more than a third, and if it's not, it's not. So that is the problem. Says Gemara, lo. No, that's not what Rav meant. The Ka'amalei, what he meant is in the case of the partnership for a calf, I Moise Shlish, I Reish Egla Lefatuma. That it was an either or. That what Rav meant to say was that either you'll make a profit of greater than a third and your wage will be the amount above the third, or if it doesn't come to pass, then you'll get the Rosh Egla. So what the Gemara is saying is that really it's not a stira on Rav, because Rav gave it an either or proposition. Either you're going to make something. In other words, of course he says you can't make the wage contingent on just a third, and then if it's not a third, there's no wage, then that's ribis. So the Gemara says he gave him an option. The option was that if the herd increased by more than a third in price, then everything above a third is yours. We don't split it 50-50, it's yours, and that's considered schar. But if we don't reach a third of improvement of profit, then you'll get the Rosh Egla, you get the head of the calf, which then is a nominal amount, whatever it is, it's a nominal amount. It could be a little amount, it could be more than a little amount, but we know that even a little amount is okay because it takes it out of the realm of ribis. So there's not a stira in Rav between what Rav says here and the Brisa and that other Brisa, because he means to say that he gave him an either or proposition. Either you get the schar or Moshe Shlish or Reish Egla Fatuma, or you get okay. So there's no kasha on Rav now because Rav was careful to put it in such a manner that one way or another the worker, the herdsman, would get something above just the profit, and that's really the key. The key is that as long as there's something above the profit, that takes it out of ribis because you're working for a wage, nominal or a lot, whatever. And here we don't know what the wage is. If the futures in cattle skyrocketed and he made a deal for a third, then he's getting a huge wage because the wage is everything above a third. But let's say the futures didn't, and let's say they went the other way, then at least he gets the Rosh Egla. Interesting way of interpreting Rav, that Rav meant to say either way.
So today, when
Yeah,
the writer had their ISKA partnership document, they include the wage that is there.
Yeah, there's language. There's a language.
It's a guaranteed wage.
Yeah, that's something. Right, exactly right. Something. You know what? Maybe next week we'll pull up an ISKA and we'll actually look at it. Unless you can do that Menashe right now. But
I'll just mention I found one last week.
Yes.
Where from the start, I'm pretty sure it was from Star K, where it specifically had that there had to be $1 of wage in there spelled out.
Exactly. So the whole point of the ISKA is to take it away from ribis, and the only way to do that is to award the worker for his effort. And of course, he'll get it whether it's a profit or a loss, because that's the deal. The deal is he gets it. And if there's a loss and you don't make the profit in the deal, at least he's gotten something. So it's consistent all the way through. Everybody agrees there has to be some nominal amount. The question is, again, we see from the different shitas, how you approach that. But that's what makes the ISKA successful, is because when people go into a partnership, the fact that there is some remuneration takes it out of ribbis. And that's the objective. That's the big objective. Says the
By the way,
Gemara.
Rabbi,
Go ahead.
the Vard of Washington has a hector Ister.
Yes.
I know I got one when my brother-in-law was you know still
Right.
alive.
Right. And do you remember the language in that, Iska?
I'm sorry.
Do you remember what the language was?
No, this is 9 years ago.
Oh, okay. So,
But I know that they've still got it.
yeah.
From
So,
my
yeah. Again, one way or the other, however you couch the language, it comes out that there is some schar that has to be paid. Now, we've seen
It
today.
was $1 you had to pay. That I remember.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting because normally that ISKA would actually show hard cash or something of value. But you see from today's Gemara that Rava interpreted Rav Ilish to allow for something other than upfront hard cash. So let's say the ISKA's language was the language of Rav Ilish. Again, maybe today we wouldn't do it because it's not as straightforward, because Rav Ilish was a gadol and he was a businessman and he understood what he was doing. So, but in theory, if what you're saying is that we're going to make a deal and one way or the other, you're going to get a benefit, a schar. We don't know what that schar is. The schar will be in the profit or in a buffer against the loss. But either way, it's a schar.
But don't they have to specify the scar?
No. So he said Mamonov Shach. When he said 50-50, he meant 50 either on the upside or on the downside. But the flip side was if it's on the upside, then on the downside, you would not have to take a 50% loss. And if it's on the downside, then on the upside, you wouldn't take a 50% interest in the profit. So what Rav Ilish was, he was sort of he was going deeper than just the language of the deal by saying that the parties agreed, of course, there's going to be a schar. Now, if you make money, you don't worry about the schar. The schar is really if you lose money, then you lose money.
You need a wage.
You got no benefit. The teretz is the benefit is in that you didn't lose as much money. So we see that even in a loss, losing less money than the other guy is we wouldn't consider that a schar, but the Gemara is saying that that is a schar because he didn't lose as much money, and so that by definition means that he got paid in a sense, right? That's a little bit different way of getting paid. You're not getting hard cash. You're not getting $1 or a dinar. You're getting the benefit of less of a loss. So, and that's according that again, I don't know how, from today from the halacha when they write an iska if that is appropriate language. I haven't seen that, but in theory, that should work because you're now maybe they want the iska to read up front what the wage is. So rather than just interpreting, what the wage will be depending on what happens later, because that's Rav Ilish. Rav Ilish opened the door to saying that you can extrapolate later on in the deal where there was the schar. There was a schar, no question about it. But where the schar was, we don't know until after the deal. I think today the iskas doesn't want to, because that's more confusing. So they want to establish right at the outset.
Specify a specific amount.
Exactly. Exactly right. So Gemara goes on and says, there's another interpretation to what we just said about Rav and Shmuel. So in other words, Rav does not say that you only make the wage if it's above a third. He says it's either or. Either you'll make it above the third, or you'll make it in the head of the calf. So he did give him an option which allowed for a schar. Says the Gemara, Ki kamarav mut Moshe Shlish b'scharcha mutter. You know what Rav meant when he said, you know what? Anything above a third will be your schar. What does he mean? Going to Islay behema l'dideho. Uh, so again, another twist. When the herdsman took the flock that the financier provided him, he took the flock, but he had his own animal too. He's a shepherd, so he owned a few animals. So what did he do? He took the flock and he put it together with his own animals. So now we have, what do we have? We have a combination of two different types of activity. So he says, Kagon de Isle behema lididei. He had his own behema. The Omre Inshir. So when people look at this, then they're not going to say it's ribis. Remember, we're worried about what's going to be, people look at it and say it's ribis. It's not ribis. Why? Gabel l'Torah, gabel l'Torah. You took food or whatever you do for the animal, and you do it for your own ox, and you do it for the other ox too. In other words, you're absorbing the fee into your own animal so that someone can't say that you didn't get a schar because what schar do you need to get? You're feeding your own animal and the other animal's eating at the trough. So what? Okay, so the Boris Ema wants to say it's not necessarily an open and shut fee or an open and shut tangible amount because if it's negligible as to whether or not you're actually going to feed the ox the herd of the other guy, then you can't say there's ribbis. So that's how he wants to
So he's saying mix in one of your own
animals
and as it
and
goes
feed your own
around, like
animal.
the rest of the flock,
Well,
he'll eat like everybody else.
Right.
But that's kind of funny because he would have had to feed his own animal separately anyway. So he's not really getting a benefit because he threw it in with the flock. I mean, that's a question that Michael might ask.
So therefore it would not be ribis because he's not doing anything just for the money guy. He's doing it for himself. And agav urcha, okay, there's enough food there for them too. But no one's going to say that he's working for the other guy. The key is if he shouldn't be working for the other guy for free. And the answer is it's not for free. He's feeding his own animal. The other animals are grazing along. So he says no one will look at that and say, oh, the other guy's deriving a benefit and therefore is ribis. So in other words, the logic here is a little bit different, is that once you mix in your own with the other, then there's no longer a clear-cut case of just feeding the other guy, of feeding the other guy's animals, and therefore you can't say ribis. It's a way of obfuscating here by saying that if people look and see that you're doing something over and above the deal, it's ribis. But if people see you're feeding your own flock, and there's some other animals that are also eating.
But we're worried about ribis for the investor side,
right?
Not for the worker. So there is no ribis for the investor when he throws his own animal in there.
That's what the boy's aim is saying, that Rob meant that he made the deal with the understanding that the herdsman had his own animals, and therefore it could never be.
Then the money for the feed is being shared also with his own animal.
But the important thing is that when people look at it, they won't mistake it for ribis because they'll see he's feeding his own flock. They won't make a cheshbon. Oh, he has 3 and the other guy has 9. So, in other words, it's not an appropriate balance. The Gemara says we're not worried about that. We're not worried that it'll look like he's feeding the other guy because the other guy has more animals than him. The fact that he has animals and has to feed, right away people will say, oh, he's feeding his own animal. Now, if the others happen to be grazing at the same time, again, it won't be mechze karibis. It won't look like ribis because it's all one pot. It's one cholent. So you can't say, oh, that's his and this is his. We won't be able to distinguish between the other, between the each one.
So the fact that his animal is grazing on the land,
Right. We'll
what
take it
what that
away.
animal eats is considered the profit or the scar for the shepherd.
Right. But what this Boyas Ema is saying is only in such a circumstance, only the way we're presenting it, is it clear that there is no ribbis. But Rav would admit that in the case where it's totally open, that either you make it or you don't make it, that would be ribbis, and therefore you have to give him the head of the animal, or a dinner. I mean, in case of Shmuel, he gave him a dinner. But if he didn't give him a dinner, then he has to agree to give him the head of the animal, because no matter what, that head of an animal is worth something. Again, we're assuming here that it's going to be fattened by the fact that the animals are eating. But let's say it's not so great, and the animals are not gaining as much weight as they need to.
But
That,
the head is always worth something,
that's right.
even if it's not fattened up.
That's
It's
correct.
worth less, but it's still a
Right.
scar.
Right. So even the Aboyas Ema agrees that when there is only the financier's animals, there has to be some nominal schar in the form of the head of the calf. But when there is a mixture of all the different animals, then we don't have to have schar.
Shepherd,
Yeah, then we don't have to have schar, because the no one, again, the chash is ribis, and they won't look like ribis because one animal is eating. And this is an interesting theory, because we see this in other places in Shas, is that once you incorporate something of your own into a deal, no matter what, not necessarily a ribis issue, then it clouds everything else, because you can always hang your hat on the fact that he's doing it for himself. Now, it could be disproportionate. I'm only one and you're 10. Okay. But the fact that people will see, oh, he's feeding his own animal, or he's doing something for himself, right away it'll take away the edge. Now, to be lefim mishur sadin, you may still want to give him something, because, so that no one,
it's ironclad.
ironclad, exactly. But at a minimum, there wouldn't be ribis, because there is there's some benefit to the herdsman,
To the worker, yeah.
yeah, who's working on his own. Right. So that's the boyus ema. And at the end of the day, we said that Rav and Shmuel can agree that that there shouldn't be any machlokes. All right. So we'll stop here. Which again, we're still in this discussion of wages and ribis, but again, we see different interpretations as to how one might conclude that there is a wage. Again, from the Heter Iska that we've seen, it's very upfront that he's getting paid. But again, from the Gemara, we see that there were ways of payment that weren't upfront salary. And that was considered valid. That was considered valid. In the case of Rav Ilish, of course, he didn't do anything wrong, but it requires extrapolation. What did he mean? And so Rava gave him the benefit of the doubt and saying Rav Ilish never would have said straight profit, straight loss. He must have meant something else. All right.